What pushed the US to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern (CPC) wasn't a single headline, it was a flow of intelligence, NGO reporting, and compiled incident lists that officials and some lawmakers now treat as de facto files. Human rights monitors, faith-based groups and organizations such as Genocide Watch documented waves of attacks in central Nigeria attributed to armed Fulani militants and other jihadist outfits. Those reports catalogued massacres, mass kidnappings, and repeated assaults on churches and Christian communities throughout from the inception of Boko Haram in 2009. Analysts inside and outside government describe these compilations as the kind of dossier that gets circulated in Washington briefings and congressional offices. Detailed event lists, eyewitness testimony summaries, and casualty tallies that are presented as evidence of targeted religious violence. Advocates who pressed the case framed the material as more than isolated communal violence and also more than farmer-herder clashes. They argued the pattern and scale met the threshold of, quote, particularly severe violations of religious freedom, end quote, under the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act. That framing, repeated in briefings and amplified by sympathetic lawmakers such as Senator Ted Cruz, is what converted scattered incident reporting into a policy dossier that the White House could act on. The most attention-getting material in the files are the incident lists. Multiple sources and field reports tallied thousands of fatalities and widespread destruction through 2025. Reports cite large-scale massacres, dozens to hundreds killed in a single incident, recurring Palm Sunday and other church-targeted attacks, and mass displacement of rural Christian farmers. NGO and faith-based trackers and some investigative outlets published figures claiming thousands of Christian deaths in 2025 alone and described entire villages burned and clergy kidnapped. These incident-by-incident records are central to the CPC case because they aim to show a pattern of targeting rather than random communal clashes. At the same time, reputable analysts caution the violence in Nigeria is complex. Jihadist groups, including ISIS-aligned cells, bandits with criminal motives, and farmer-herder conflicts all overlap. Several respected outlets and analysts argue that while Christians have been heavily victimized, many Muslim communities have also suffered, and the causes include criminality, competition over land and resources, and porous security, not only explicit religious cleansing. The tension between incident lists that emphasize Christian victims and analyses that emphasize mixed drivers is a central fault line in quotes, how the files are interpreted. In late October 2025, the accumulation of reporting, the persistent advocacy of some US lawmakers, and public pressure from high-profile voices produced a political tipping point. Senatorial and House officers repeatedly requested formal investigations. Lawmakers cited NGO tallies and incident lists in hearings and press statements. On October 31, 2025, President Donald Trump announced the designation of Nigeria as a quote, country of particular concern, or CPC, explicitly citing alleged failures to protect Christian communities and referring to the scale of killings documented in those compiled reports. The Designation revived an instrument of US policy designed to flag, quote, particularly severe violations of religious freedoms, end quote, and put Nigeria back under a legal and diplomatic spotlight. The White House action was presented as the natural next step after the classified and open source materials were aggregated and vetted. Officials argued the pattern justified the CPC label, and some congressional allies welcomed the move as overdue. That political momentum, driven by the file's emphasis and the pressure of sympathetic lawmakers, is the proximate cause behind the designation. The designation did not land on neutral ground. Nigeria's government reacted strongly, rejecting what it called a selective and misleading narrative. Abuja emphasized that insecurity in Nigeria is multifaceted, involving Boko Haram, ISWAP, criminal bandits, and communal conflicts, and objected to being characterized as tolerating a campaign of anti-Christian genocide. Official statements and ministry press releases criticized senators and outside advocates for inflating casualty claims and politicizing Nigeria's internal security challenges. The government stressed constitutional commitments to protecting all religions and asked for evidence-based cooperation rather than unilateral labels. This information battle matters because it shapes international response. Advocates point to the files as proof of systemic failure to protect Christians in Nigeria. The Nigerian presidency counters that those same data are being selectively framed. Independent analysts warn that both extremes can distort policy, either by minimizing the suffering of victims or by turning complex conflicts into a single cause narrative that risks fueling sectarian backlash. A CPC designation does not automatically equal sweeping sanctions, but it unlocks a set of diplomatic options. Restrictions on certain forms of U.S. assistance that are non-humanitarian, targeted sanctions, intensified investigations, and greater international scrutiny. For Nigeria, the label is a geopolitical problem. It risks cooling bilateral cooperation on security and development, complicating counter-insurgency assistance, and giving domestic political actors new incentives to exploit narratives of persecution. Truth be told, in Nigeria, Christians are facing persecution, especially in northern parts of the country. Congressional press releases and state-level statements tied to the designation signal willingness among some U.S. lawmakers to consider tangible penalties if Nigeria does not meet specified benchmarks for protecting religious freedom. At the same time, human rights bodies and independent observers call for careful evidence-based follow-up, rigorous investigations, transparent casualty verification, and programs that address the root drivers of violence: land conflicts, cattle herding pressures, extremist recruitment, and weak local governance. The coming weeks and months will test whether the files remain a political cudgel or become the basis for a coordinated international effort to stem violence, protect vulnerable Christian communities, especially in the northern part of the country, and rebuild trust between Nigerian presidency and international partners. The stakes are high. Misplaced policy can inflame tensions. Careful verification and targeted assistance can save lives. The classified Fulani Jihad Files, whether compiled by NGOs, congressional staff, or contained in classified briefings, were the spark that transformed a diffuse crisis into a discrete policy decision in Washington. But designation is only the start, not the finish. The international community now faces a practical choice: use these compilations to push for impartial investigations, humanitarian protection, and measures that address root causes, or allow the issue to calcify into a binary narrative that deepens divisions. Thank you for joining us today. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you later.